The snow fell in thick, silent sheets across the Montana wilderness, blanketing the earth in an icy hush. It was nearing nightfall, and the wind had turned bitter, howling through the trees like a warning. Caleb Rourke, a quiet, rugged ranch hand in his late 30s, had just finished checking on the herd along the upper ridge. With a worn wool scarf around his neck and frost clinging to his beard, he was hurrying back to his cabin before the storm worsened as he crossed a narrow ridge near the frozen creek. Something caught his eye, a smear of color against the white. He slowed his horse. At first, it looked like just another snow-covered branch, but as he approached, his stomach dropped. It was a girl. She was lying half-curled in the snow, her dress soaked and torn, skin ghostly pale, lips tinged blue. Her hair was tangled and frozen in places, one hand tucked beneath her, the other stretched toward the icy creek as if she'd tried to crawl. Caleb dismounted in an instant, the snow crunching under his boots as he hurried to her side. He knelt beside her, touched her neck. There was a pulse, faint but there. Her breath came in shallow, struggling puffs, fogging the air. She couldn't have been more than 20. Caleb glanced around. No signs of anyone else. No horse. No wagon. Just this girl, freezing to death beside a creek in the middle of nowhere. Without hesitation, he yanked off his own coat and gently draped it over her shaking shoulders. He peeled off his gloves and pressed her hand between his palms, trying to warm her fingers. "You're safe now," he whispered, his voice rough with cold and worry. She stirred faintly. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused, barely able to open. Her lips moved, cracked and dry, and she managed one word before losing consciousness again. "Run?" Caleb's chest tightened. He didn't know what she meant, but it didn't matter, not yet. First, he had to keep her alive. He lifted her carefully into his arms, shocked by how light she was, too light. He carried her up the slope toward where his horse stood waiting. The Maori stamped nervously, sensing something strange. Caleb slung the girl gently across the saddle, mounted behind her, and guided them toward his cabin, deep in the woods. The storm began to thicken as they rode, winds whipping snow into Caleb's face. He kept one arm around the girl to keep her steady and pressed close for warmth. The journey felt longer than it ever had before, but finally, through the trees, the small log cabin came into view, smoke rising weakly from the chimney. Inside, the warmth from the fireplace wrapped around them like a blessing. Caleb laid her on the cot near the fire, covered her with thick wool blankets, and began rubbing her hands and feet to bring back circulation. He set a kettle to boil and crushed a bit of dried ginger into it, something to fight the cold from. The inside died as the flames danced and cracked in the hearth. Caleb sat beside her, watching her face, pale and bruised, but peaceful now. He didn't know who she was or what she was running from, but she was here, and she was alive. For now, that was enough. Outside, the storm raged. But inside that little cabin, a fire burned, and beside it, the beginnings of a bond that would change both their lives had just been lit. The morning light broke through the cabin windows in soft, golden rays, melting the edge of the night storm. Inside, the girl stirred. Caleb sat in a chair beside the cot, having kept vigil through the night. He hadn't slept. His coffee had long gone cold, and his eyes were red, but he refused to leave her side. Her eyelids fluttered. She drew in a sharp breath and sat up suddenly, eyes wild, heart pounding, then winced from the sudden pain. Her shoulder was bruised, her lips cracked, and her throat dry. She scanned the unfamiliar room, and her gaze landed on Caleb. She shrank back slightly, confused, frightened. "It's all right," Caleb said gently, holding his hands up. "You're safe now. I found you by the creek. You were near frozen." Her voice came out in a croak. Where am I?" "My cabin." "About 10 miles from Willow Ridge," Caleb replied. "Name's Caleb Rourke. I work cattle for the Micklings down by Silver Pine. He paused, watching her. What's your name? The girl hesitated. I'm Claire. The name sat heavy in the air. Caleb noticed the tremble in her hands, the way her eyes flicked toward the window, as if expecting someone to come barging through it. She was scared. Not just of the cold or of being alone, but of something that had followed her in silence. You. Don't have to tell me everything, Caleb said quietly. Not yet. Just drink this. He offered a warm mug of ginger tea, and she reached for it slowly, her fingers brushing his small, delicate, cold dot as Claire sipped the tea. Caleb added, You said something last night, before you passed out. Run. Who were you running from? Claire's eyes filled with hesitation. For a moment, she looked like she might cry. Then she shook her head and set the mug down. I shouldn't have stopped, she whispered. But I was so tired. My legs wouldn't work. I thought maybe dying out there would be easier. Caleb's chest clenched. He didn't push. Instead, he set about making a simple breakfast, eggs and toast. As he worked, Claire watched him, unsure whether to trust this rugged stranger with kind eyes and rough hands. I didn't mean to find anyone, she said finally. I was just trying to get away. From who? Claire stared at the flickering fire, her jaw tight. A man who said I owed him. The way she said it chilled Caleb more than the storm outside. He wasn't family? No. She hesitated. But he took me in. Said I had to earn my keep. I thought it was kindness. Turned out he had other plans. He told me I was going to be sold to someone in the mines, a labor camp. Said girls like me disappear all the time. Her voice cracked on the last word. Caleb stood still, his hands clenched into fists. Claire looked up, eyes shining with fear. I couldn't let that happen, so I ran. I don't know where I was going. Just away. Caleb crouched beside her. You don't ever have to go back. Not while I'm around. Her eyes filled with tears. No one had ever said that to her. Not like they meant it. He reached for the coat, the same one he'd wrapped around her last night, and gently laid it on her shoulders again. She gripped. The wool like a lifeline. Outside, the snow had started to melt. But inside, a different kind of thaw was beginning, one that would bring the truth to light and test the strength of both their hearts. Claire didn't sleep much that second night, not because of the cold this time, but because of the ache behind her eyes. Every time she closed them, she saw the man's shadow, the one who said she belonged to him, who kept her locked in. Backroom-like property. His voice echoed in her mind. No one cares what happens to girls like you. But Caleb had said she was safe. He had looked her in the eye when he said it, and something in that look made her believe just enough to stay put another night. In the morning, Caleb offered her a pair of clean boots and a mended wool sweater from a box under his bed. You'll need 'em, he said with a soft smile. It's cold out, even with the sun, she blinked. Where are we going? He slung a rifle over his shoulder and handed her a second scarf. Just checking the trap lines. There. Not far. Thought the fresh air might do you some good. If you're up for it. Claire hesitated, then slowly nodded. Okay. The snow crunched beneath their boots as they walked through the trees. Caleb kept a steady pace, never too fast, never too far. Claire stayed close, constantly looking over her shoulder. Every snapping twig made her flinch. Caleb noticed, but said nothing. He just kept walking beside her, letting her have her silence. They came upon the first trap empty. The second held a rabbit. Caleb dispatched it quickly and gently, his movements clean, without cruelty. Claire turned her face away, but he explained softly, Only what we need. Nothing more. I don't like taking more than that. Claire looked at him. You live out here alone? Caleb shrugged. Lost my wife 2 winters ago. Snow took her while she was riding home. Since then, it's just been me. Something shifted in her. I'm sorry." He nodded but said nothing else. Pain doesn't always need words. On the way back to the cabin, they saw them dash footprints dot fresh ones. Deep ones, too big to be Claire's. Caleb stopped mid-step. His eyes sharpened. He scanned the surrounding woods, his posture suddenly alert. He crouched and examined the tracks, then rose slowly. They're headed toward the ridge. Came from the south. Claire's face went pale. "That's where I came from." "Same man?" She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Caleb led her back to the cabin quickly but calmly, his hand always near the rifle. Inside, he shut the door, bolted it, and pulled the curtains. "I've got a neighbor about 4 miles down. Friend of mine, ex-sheriff, name's Everett Boone. If someone's out looking for you, Everett can help us make this official, legal, protective." Claire's throat tightened. "You'd go through all that for me?" Caleb looked her dead in the eye. "You're not for sale, Claire. You're not a debt. You're not a burden. You're a human being. Someone has to stand up and say it might as well be me." For a long second, she just stared at him. Then slowly she nodded. That night, she helped chop potatoes for dinner. She didn't flinch when he passed behind her. And when he set his coat around her shoulders again as the fire dimmed, she didn't cry this time. She just whispered a quiet, "Thank you." Outside, the forest had grown still, but the tracks in the snow warned of a danger that hadn't yet passed. Someone was coming, and Caleb knew he had to be ready. The wind howled low that night, curling around the cabin like it was trying to get in. Claire barely slept. Her nerves were stretched thin, the footprints still fresh in her mind. Caleb sat near the fire most of the night, rifle within reach, boots still on, listening to every creak of the wood and every crack of a branch outside. At first light, he stepped outside, silent as a shadow. Claire watched from the small window, her breath fogging the glass. He walked the edge of the clearing, tracking. When he returned, his jaw was tight. "Someone came closer last night," he said, setting his rifle gently by the wall. "Watched. U.S. probably. Didn't try the door. Left before sunrise." Claire felt cold despite the fire. "You think it was him?" Caleb nodded grimly. "Might be." He didn't need to ask more. Claire knew the man she'd escaped from wasn't one to let go. He thought he owned her. If he was nearby, he wasn't giving up easily. "I think it's time we go see Everett Boone," Caleb said. "He's got a radio, contacts in town. If we want to do this right, get you safe, we'll need him." Claire's fingers tightened around her mug. "What if he thinks I'm just some runaway? Then he'll look you in the eye, same as I did, and he'll see the truth." They packed quickly blankets, dried meat, a small tin of coffee. Caleb dressed Claire in his late wife's heavy coat and tied a scarf tight around her head. Then he strapped his rifle across his back and loaded the sled. The snow was thick, the trail rough. They moved slowly, Caleb leading the old mule while Claire sat bundled in the sled behind him. Trees creaked under the weight of frost. A few birds stirred in the branches, but mostly the forest was silent. 3 miles in, Caleb paused. His eyes narrowed. Claire sat up. "What is it?" "Tracks," he murmured. "Fresh. Following ours." A branch snapped in the distance. Claire's breath hitched. Then a voice called out too close, "Hey, that girl with you?" Caleb didn't turn around. He reached slowly for the rifle. The man stepped into view about 30 yards off. Tall, grimy, a broken-toothed grin on his face. "She's mine." "Mister," the man said. "Took off when I wasn't looking. Ain't no harm done, just give her back and I'll be on my way." Claire's face drained. Her fingers clenched the sides of the sled. Caleb's voice was cold as steel. "She's not going anywhere with you." The man's grin twisted. "You got no idea who you're messin' with." "I know enough," Caleb replied, raising the rifle. "She's under my care now. If you want to test that, be my guest." The man hesitated. Something in Caleb's eyes, quiet, calm, absolutely unshaken, made him think twice. He spat into the snow. "This ain't over," he growled, and turned back into the woods. Caleb held the rifle steady until the sound of footsteps vanished. Then he turned to Claire, his voice softer now. "Still want to go see Everett?" Claire nodded slowly. "Yes, please." For the first time in days, she didn't feel like running. Not anymore. She wanted to stand somewhere. And Caleb, this quiet man in the snow, had just given her the courage to do it. As they moved forward again, the sky above the trees cracked open with pale gold light. The danger wasn't over, but she wasn't alone anymore. The sky grew darker as Caleb and Claire climbed higher into the hills. A storm was brewing. Caleb could smell it in the air, the way animals go quiet, and even the wind shifts. He urged the mule faster, anxious to reach Everett Boone's place. Before snowfall made the trail impossible. Claire remained bundled in the sled, silent but wide-eyed, scanning the woods with unease. The man who'd claimed her captor was out there somewhere, maybe following, maybe circling ahead. But she trusted Caleb now. He hadn't flinched when he saw danger. He'd stood firm. That mattered more than anything. By late afternoon, they reached the cabin. Boone Ridge was named after Everett Boone, an ex-scout who'd built his place near a rock bluff that overlooked the snowy valleys like a watchtower. His cabin was sturdy, square, and fortified like a frontier outpost. Smoke rose from its chimney. 2 hounds barked as Caleb approached, but the front door opened before he could knock. Everett was tall, wiry, with a white beard and sharp eyes that had once guided men through blizzards and over mountains. He looked Caleb over, then Claire, and said only, "Looks like you need warmth and a plan. Get in." Inside, the heat hit Claire like a soft wall. Boone handed her a wool blanket without asking and poured her a mug of hot cider. Then he turned to Caleb with a knowing look. "Who's after her?" Caleb told him. Not every detail. Claire still wasn't ready, but enough for Everett to understand. A cruel man, an illegal claim. A girl who'd been treated more like property than a person. Boone didn't ask for proof. He looked at Claire with a gaze honed from years on the frontier, where you learn to read truth in the way people breathe and flinch. Then he nodded once. "She stays here tonight," Everett said. "I'll radio the sheriff come morning." Claire's breath caught. "The sheriff? What if he doesn't believe me?" Boone's voice was low, reassuring. "Sheriff Marks don't take kindly to men who treat girls like slaves. But even if he did, we've got a way to keep you safe until you're strong enough to fight back." Caleb looked at her gently. "You've got a voice, Claire, and we'll help you use it." Claire didn't speak for a long time. She stared into the fire, her thoughts deep and tangled. No one had ever talked to her like that before. Like she could choose. Like her words had weight. Slowly, her hand tightened around the mug. "I want to tell him," she said. "The sheriff, everything." Boone nodded, and there was something proud in his old eyes. That night, Claire slept in a warm bed under a heavy quilt stitched by Everett's late wife. Caleb sat by the fire with Everett, sharing quiet talk, planning what they'd say in the morning. Outside, the storm rolled in, blanketing the mountains in fixed silence, and far off in the trees, beyond the edge of Boone's land, a figure watched the soft flicker of light in the cabin window. Waiting. The morning after the storm rolled over Boone Ridge, the mountains gleamed with ice-crusted trees and fresh snow. Sunlight poured through the cabin windows, but it did little to calm Claire's nerves. She sat quietly, her hands curled. In her lap, waiting. At dawn, Everett had cranked up the radio and called Sheriff Marks. The gruff voice on the other end agreed to ride up by noon. No patrol car could make it that high in the snow, so he'd be on horseback. Now, Claire waited for justice, for fear, and for something she'd never had before, a say in her own life. Caleb sat across from her, sharpening a small knife with calm focus. "You don't have to tell him everything at once," he said gently. "Just tell the truth in pieces. Start where you can breathe." She nodded. It wasn't the words she feared. It was not being believed. She'd seen it happen to others girls from the same camp, the same kind of nowhere. People didn't ask how they ended up where they did. They just looked the other way. Just before noon, Boone's hounds barked again. Caleb stepped out into the cold, and there he was, Sheriff Nathan Marks, mounted on a thick-coated chestnut horse, a rifle slung behind his saddle. Marks was middle-aged, barrel-chested, with steady blue eyes and a badge that hadn't rusted despite years of wear. He greeted Everett with a nod, then turned toward Caleb and Claire. "This the girl?" he asked quietly. "She's the one," Everett replied. Marks didn't press. He removed his gloves and knelt in front of Claire, not like she was a victim, but like he was asking permission to hear her story. "You got anything you want to say?" he asked her gently. Claire opened her mouth, but the words caught. Caleb gave her a small nod. She tried again. "I was taken from my mama when I was 8, she said. "A man came, said he'd found work for me. My mama thought it was house help, said he'd feed me and teach me to read." Her voice shook, but that's not what happened. She told him about the backbreaking work, the long hours, the cold barn she slept in. How he took other girls to some younger than her. How he threatened them if they cried. How they were never paid. How they weren't allowed to leave. Caleb saw Mark's jaw clench. When Claire finished, Mark stood up and looked to Boone. "You got her name?" "Claire Thomas," Boone said. "And the man?" Claire's fingers tightened. "Marlon Keever. He keeps moving. Changes his name sometimes. But he's staying low in the woods now. I think he knows I ran." Marks didn't say much. Just nodded, tipped his hat low, and said, "You did right coming here." He turned to Everett. "She stays with you for now. I'll head to town, file a protection order, and start paperwork. Then I'll come back with a deputy and a warrant. What if he comes first?" Caleb asked. Marks looked him square in the eye. "Then make sure he don't leave." With that, he mounted up and disappeared down the snow-covered trail. Inside, Claire sat by the fire. She wasn't shaking anymore. She felt hollow but lighter. She'd spoken. She'd been heard. And outside, in the hush of fresh snow, Caleb loaded his rifle and double-checked the cabin door, because this wasn't over yet. The cabin was quiet that night, too quiet. Even the fire crackled like it was holding its breath. Claire tried to sleep, curled beneath a wool blanket on the cot Caleb had made up for her near the hearth. Boone lay close, his great brown head resting on his paws, one eye open. Caleb sat in the corner, sharpening his old rifle with a calm that made Claire more nervous than the storm outside. Ever since Sheriff Marks rode off that morning, a weight had settled in her chest. She kept looking out the window toward the woods, toward the life she ran from. It was nearing midnight when the dogs growled. Boone stood first, teeth bared. Caleb rose slowly, grabbing the rifle. Claire's breath hitched in her throat. The front door rattled. Caleb signaled her silently, "Go to the back room, stay low." She nodded, heart pounding, and crawled behind the crates. Boone stayed beside her, ears flattened, body tense. Then came the voice, low, raspy, familiar. "I know you got her in there." Marlon Keever. Claire pressed her hands to her ears. That voice still lived in her nightmares. "You got 3 seconds to send her out," he barked, "or I burn this place down." Caleb stepped forward into the pale moonlight pouring through the window. "You try that, and you won't leave here." Standing, I raised that girl, Marlin spat. You worked her like a mule and starved her half to death, Caleb said flatly. That's not raising, that's slavery. A silence stretched between them, sharp and dangerous. Then the man stepped into view, tall, thin, cloaked in a filthy coat, shotgun slung across his back. His eyes were wild. His lips twisted in a sneer. Claire felt her whole body lock up. Boone let out a low growl. I got legal claim, Marlin said. Her mama gave her up. No paperwork, no blood. No rights, Caleb said, voice steady. And the sheriff's already riding with a warrant. You show up here again, and it's jail or worse. I ain't afraid of no sheriff. You should be, Caleb replied, raising the rifle slightly. But you should be more afraid of me. That's when Marlin made his mistake. He stepped toward the porch, hand twitching toward his gun. Caleb didn't hesitate. He fired a single shot. The bark of the rifle echoed like thunder through the mountain trees. Marlin stumbled back, his hat flying off, the butt of his shotgun still in his hand. The bullet hadn't hit him. It had grazed the side of his coat and shattered the lantern by the post, sending sparks into the snow. He staggered, breathing hard, then turned and vanished into the dark. Claire exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for 10 years. Caleb locked the door. You all right? She nodded, but her hands were shaking. He knelt beside her, his eyes soft. He's not coming back tonight. I thought he'd never stop looking, she whispered. He probably won't, but now he'll think twice about where he's looking. She leaned into him then, her forehead resting against his shoulder. And for the first time in her life, she felt what safety truly meant, not just shelter from the cold, but someone standing in front of the feared Dot by morning. The sheriff would return with more men and Marlin would face justice. But tonight, under the stars and snow, a girl no one fought for finally had someone who would. Let me know when you're ready for part 8. Warmth in the snow, where closure, healing, and a brand new beginning await Claire and Caleb. Morning broke softly over the valley. Snow still covered the earth like a blanket, but the storm had passed, and sunlight filtered through the clouds with gentle gold. The air was still cold, but not cruel anymore. It felt like the first breath after a long time under water. Inside the cabin, Claire stood at the window with a cup of hot tea in her hands. Boone snoozed by the fire. Caleb had gone out to chop wood and check the perimeter. She could see him through the trees, swinging the axe with steady strength, calm as ever. She didn't flinch anymore at sudden sounds. Her hands no longer trembled. When the wind rattled the door, Sheriff Marks had returned earlier that morning with 2 deputies and a court order in hand. They had followed Marlin's tracks until they caught him on the edge of town, trying to barter his way onto a wagon heading west. He hadn't resisted this time. Maybe it was the shock of the rifle, or maybe, deep down, even he knew he had lost. He was now in the county jail awaiting trial for endangering a child, unlawful captivity, and attempted arson. You're safe now, the sheriff had said again, tipping his head gently toward Claire. She had nodded, eyes full of something like peace. But that wasn't what stayed with her. What stayed was Caleb's voice, steady in the firelight that night. The way he stepped between her and the man who broke her childhood. The way he never asked anything from her, only gave, quietly, fully, like he didn't know how to do anything else. Claire turned as the door opened. Caleb stepped inside, shaking snow from his boots. We'll need more kindling by sunset, he said, placing his gloves by the hearth. Claire nodded. Then, after a moment, do you want me to help? He looked up, surprised. If you're ready, sure. I think I am, she said softly. She followed him outside, wrapped in the very same coat he'd laid on her shoulders that first night, the night she thought she wouldn't survive. The coat still smelled like pine and smoke and safety. Together, they worked beside the woodpile. Caleb taught her how to swing the axe, how to listen for the right crack in the grain. She wasn't strong, not yet, but he didn't correct her harshly, just placed his hands over hers and guided her gently. That night they ate rabbit stew by the fire, and Claire asked him about his late wife. She died before the war, he said quietly. She was kind, loved birds, had the softest laugh you ever heard. Claire didn't press for more. She just listened, and in the silence after, she shared her own memories of her mother's lullabies, of drawing animals in the dirt before Marlin started locking her in the shed. There were tears. Not from pain anymore, but release. Later, Caleb brought out a bundle of papers. Found these in town, he said. Adoption forms. Only if you want, Claire's breath caught. You'd really want me here? You're already here, he said, eyes steady. This just makes it right. She looked down, then nodded. Okay, yes. Outside, the snow began to melt. Drops fell from the roof in slow, steady rhythm. Inside, warmth bloomed not just from the fire, but from two hearts, once broken, learning how to beat side by side again. Claire no longer felt like a girl hiding in shadows. She was a part of something now. A home, a family. And deep in her chest, the words he'd spoken on that frozen night echoed once more. You're safe now. And this time she believed it.